Have you ever wanted AI to just create social media content for you and post it automatically on a schedule? In this video, I'm going to show you how, using a tool called AI Rule Engine. AI Rule Engine is a no-code solution that allows you to automate workflows and execute them in your own cloud environment. I'll show you step-by-step how to use AI to create a process that generates an image and some text, and then use an API to post it to social media automatically, multiple times a day. I'm going to be using x.com, but the steps would be similar for any social media platform. To begin, go to ruleengine.ai and create a free account so you can follow along. Once you're logged in, you can create a project that can hold all of your rules and actions. I'm going to create one called x.com post generator. I'll save the project and agree to the terms and conditions. And then I'm going to create another project called x.com post generator extension. And I'm going to change the project type from standard, which means it's private, to extension, which will be available to the public once it's published. So by the end of this video, there will be an extension published out to the public that you can use to include in your own project. I still think it would be valuable for you to continue watching and learn how rule sets and extensions can be created, but if you just want to skip to the next video that shows how to use the extension, you can certainly do that. Next, we'll go to the Extension tab and give our extension a name. I'll call it the same name as my project, x.com post generator, and for the description, I'm going to say this accepts an AI prompt and will generate an image and tweet text, which will be posted to x.com. For visibility, you can set it to public or private. If it's private, you can restrict it so that only certain projects can find it. I'm going to set mine to public. Your organization will be displayed as the creator of the extension. This also lets you group multiple extensions under the same organization. For category, I'm going to search for something related to social media, for example, social media management. Next, I'm going to click on the Parameters tab. You'll need to enter in the name of your first rule set. I'll be creating a rule set name called entry, and I'll create that in a moment. For input parameters, we want an input parameter that will ask the user for the prompt that they want to use. I'm just going to call it AI prompt. And set the placeholder text to prompt text. For the hint, we'll say AI prompt to generate tweet text, and I'll save it in xprompt text. We'll mark it as required, and let's keep it as a string. For the extension output, we'll tell the user that we'll be returning the post ID, and I'll call the context item that will hold that value, xpost ID, which I'll be setting later. If you're wondering what context keys are, you can think of the context as a set of global variables or key value pairs that can hold various types of data. You can pass data into the context when you execute a rule set, change the context with various actions, or set it by retrieving data from an API call, and so on. Let's save the project. Now we have two projects, one for the extension and one that's going to use the extension once it's published. I'm going to go back into the extension project and give you a quick tour. This is the project dashboard. And this is where your rule sets will be defined. A rule set is exactly what it sounds like. It's a set of rules that determine what functionality is going to be executed. Here you have a set of conditions. And here's a set of action sets. These two allow you to define conditions and actions outside of the rule sets so that you can use them in multiple rule sets if you want. When we're ready, we're going to publish our extension out to the public. And if we want, we can add an environment where we can test the extension before we publish it, which is always a good idea. I'm going to go back to the Rule Sets tab, and let's create our first rule set here. Remember in our extension, we said we'd start with a rule set called entry. And so this rule set will act as the entry point to our extension. You can enter a description if you like here. Max rules to match is if you want to limit how many rules will have their actions applied when their condition matches. I'm going to leave it blank, so any match rule will be applied. Randomizing the rule order will shuffle the rules before checking for conditions that match. We'll leave this off. You can also run rules in parallel for added performance, but this has the side effect of not running the rules in the order shown. Let's leave this off as well. The Rules tab is where we'll define our rules, and the Manual Run Setup tab is where you can predefine context items that you want to pass into your rule set when executing them manually. In our case, if we wanted to test our extension before it's published, we would execute our entry rule set manually. To do that, we'd have to add the AI prompt to the context first. By adding a default value for the prompt here, we wouldn't have to enter it every time we tested. Let's not worry about this right now, and instead go into the rules and add a new rule. We'll call the rule XRule. Next, click on the Condition tab. A condition checks the current state of the context and determines if the action should be executed or not. You would specify a context key and then select how you want to compare another value to that context item. For example, you might want to know if some text contains a phrase, if it matches a regular expression, or you could state a question or assumption to AI. Then you select what value to compare it with. You can compare it to a constant value that you enter in. You can compare it to another context item. Or you can compare it to an environment variable. An environment variable is a value that is specific to the environment that you're running this on. This allows you to have different variables per environment, which is useful if you want to have a set of secrets or API keys for lower environments versus production environments. For our case, we don't need to match anything right now because we want this rule to execute every time. So I'm just going to delete this, and you can see that it says that a rule with 0 clauses and the match type set to all will always be matched. This means this rule will always execute whenever this rule set is executed. Next, click on the Actions tab, and here you will notice that there are several actions to choose from. For example, you can call an API, you can call another rule set from this rule set, you can write additional data to the logs and include attachments, you can add or update or remove context items, and you can transform data. The transform action has a large number of operations that you can perform, such as math operations, date and time operations, string operations, array operations, and so on. You can also chain multiple transformations together in one action, so this can be pretty useful. Also, you can loop through an array and you can apply a series of actions to each item within that array. And then we have our built-in AI functions, which you can use to invoke chat and text generation, image recognition, speech to text, text to speech, and content moderation. And then finally, because we're in an extension, we need to know when the extension is done and control can go back to the project that was calling our extension. That's what this extension callback does. There's nothing to configure here. It just lets the extension know that we've done everything we needed to do before control goes back to the project that is using our extension. Now, although we can specify any of these actions right in line here, for larger projects, I strongly suggest that you use named action sets instead. As I mentioned before, named conditions and named action sets can be reused in multiple places, and they make it easier to organize your workflow. But before we dive into creating our actions, let's come up with a plan of what actions this extension will need. This is a sequence diagram that I created that has different actors, such as the AI rule engine, the AI provider, which can be ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, or whatever you want it to be, and then x.com itself. First, we want to request that AI creates some text to use for the tweet. When we get the text, we'll then ask AI to generate an image using that text as inspiration. It doesn't have to be the same AI as before. You can use one AI provider for the text and a completely different provider for creating the image. Using the image that we get back, we want to compose a request that will be used to upload the image to x.com. Once we upload the image using the request we made, we'll get back a JSON payload that has a media ID in it. We need to have a step to parse the media ID out of the JSON. When we have it, then we'll want to use that ID in the original text to compose a new request that will go to x.com. And finally, we'll send that off to x.com. And by the end of all of this, we should have a new tweet on our account that has our image and our text on it. Let's start creating our actions. Our first action is going to be to generate the text of the post. Rather than leaving the rule editor to go to the main menu to create an action set, I can create a new action set right here. I'm going to name my action set X create post text. And for the action, we'll go to the AI menu and select chat. I'm going to name this action Gen Text. And for the description, I'm going to say generate the text for the tweet. For the AI provider, I'm going to select OpenAI. And for the AI model, I'm going to put in GPT-4o Mini. Now, if you're not sure which AI models that you can put in here, you can select this help icon, which will give you some tips on how you can find various models for different AI vendors. For example, for ChatGPT, they have a number of models that you can use. And once you find a model that you like that has the capabilities that you need, you can click on it and then select this icon to save that model name to your clipboard. In our case, I chose a model that will be able to generate our text for us, but one that is also cost-effective. For the role or persona, you don't have to specify something here, but in my case, I'm going to put you are a marketer and an SEO specialist. This will make the AI behave as if it has specialized knowledge in this area. And for the prompt, if you will remember, we added an input parameter that would capture the user's AI prompt. So we want to reference that from the context. And we named that xPrompt text. So this matches the context key that we specified when we created the parameter. And then finally, we want to specify which context key the resulting text from AI will be in. So I'm going to put it in xpost text. Then we'll apply the changes to our action and save the action set. Now we have our first action set here. Our next action set will be responsible for generating the image that we'll be using for our post. I'll create a new action set, and I'm going to call it XGenImage, and I want to tell the AI to use the text that we just generated. So I'm going to add a transform data action, and I'm going to call this action create image gen prompt. This will concatenate two strings of text together. The first string will be a constant that tells the AI what to do with our generated text. We'll say, create an eye-catching image for a tweet, which will be accompanied by the following tweet text. Then I'm going to select a string operation of append so that I can append the text that was generated by the previous call to AI, which was saved in the context key of xpost text. Once those two strings are concatenated together, I want to save the result in a new context key called xImageGenPrompt. I'll apply the changes, and then the next action within this action set will use that prompt to generate the image. I'll select the AI image generation action, and I'll call this action xImageGen. And I'll paste in a short description for the action. This time I'm going to use one of Google's models to generate the image. And then, for our prompt, I'm going to reference the output of the previous action. And then I'm going to save the image that we get back from the AI in a new context key that we'll call xImage. We'll apply the changes to our action, and now our second action set is done. For our next action set, we will upload our image to x.com and get back a media ID. So I'm going to create a new action set, and I'm going to call it xPostMedia. Then I'll add a new API action to our action set, and I'll call it xMedia API. By reviewing the x.com documentation, we can see that the request method needs to be post instead of get, so we'll change that here. Then we'll set the request URL specified in the documentation for uploading media content. We don't need any additional URL segments or request headers, so we'll go down to our request content and set it to multi-part form data. We'll add 3 values here. The first value is going to be called media, and that's going to be a reference to our image. The next one is going to be media_category, and the value will be the constant of tweet_image. And the final one is called media_type, and that's going to be the MIME type of the image that we're uploading. Next, we're going to go over to the Authentication tab. These values will tell x.com that we are taking actions on behalf of a specific user. Click on the OAuth 2.0 radio button. We'll choose Pixie for the authentication type. The grant type field defaults to authorization code, and we'll want to leave that as it is. The token URL is going to be the value from the x.com documentation for authenticating a user. And for our client ID, we'll put in xClient ID, which we'll add to our environment variables later. For the scope, we're going to put in a number of different scopes here. We'll use users.read, tweet.read, tweet.write, which we need so we can create posts, media.write, so we can upload our image, and lastly offline.access, which allows the access token to be long-lived and to be refreshed. We can leave the audience blank. For the access token, we're going to leave the value source as environment variable, and I'll call this xAccess token. And for the refresh token, we'll do xRefresh token. We'll set these values later in the project that will use our extension. For the API response, you can choose where to save the data that comes back. So for example, you can choose to save the success status, or you can save the reason phrase, which may contain why your request failed. These are nice to have, but the one we care about the most is the output target. We'll save the output to the context item called xMediaResponse. We don't need to worry about reading any response headers. The last tab on the API action allows us to configure some options for the API call. We can choose what happens when the API fails. We can change the default timeout seconds, and we can change whether or not it runs asynchronously or not. If you choose yes, then a new header will be sent to the request called xCorrelationID. Assuming that you have access to the server that is being called, you can grab this value and use it when calling this endpoint on one of your environments that you set up through AI Rule Engine. And this will allow you to execute the next rule set within your workflow while also giving it access to the existing context. We don't need it for our workflow, so I'm just going to leave it set to no. We'll apply changes and then save the action set. And now our third action set is done. Actually, I forgot that we still need to extract the media ID out of the JSON that we got back from x.com. That's not a problem. We'll just apply our changes to the rule and then save our rule set. It's always a good idea to save your changes as you go along. We'll go over to the Action Sets tab and go back into the XPost Media action set so we can add another action to it. I'll add transform action, and I'm going to name this extract media ID. The source of the transform will be the context key of xMediaResponse. Then, we'll click in the operation field and search for the operator called JSON path, which allows us to pluck individual values out of the JSON payload. We'll specify the JSON path to the media ID in the response content. You can look at the x.com documentation to see what the JSON payload coming back from their server looks like. Let's save the value of the media ID into a new context key called xMediaID. If the JSON contains any error message, we can also grab that by adding another transform. Just like before, we'll use xMediaResponse as the source for the transform, and we'll use the same JSON path operator. This time we'll specify a JSON path to get the JSON error message if it exists. And we'll save this in the context key of xMediaError. But if there's no error, then we just want to ignore it and continue. In other words, we don't need to halt the process if fetching the error message fails. Let's apply the changes to our action and save our action set. Let's continue creating our next action set right from the Action Sets tab. We'll just need to remember to add our new action sets to the rule later. We'll add a new action set. And this one I'm going to call xCreatePostJSON. We're going to be creating a JSON payload to send to x.com that contains our media ID in our text. Now, we could use the transform data action to do this and concatenate a bunch of strings together to create our JSON. But instead of doing that, we can use this createJSON action, which will be much easier. I'm going to call the action xPostJSON, and I'm going to output it to a context key also called xPostJSON. When using this action, you'll have to choose whether the root element of your JSON should be an object or an array. In our case, it will be an object. Following the documentation for x.com, we can see that they expect a property that is a nested object. The property name holding this nested object will be called media, and then inside of this child object, they expect a property that contains an array. This new property inside the child object will be called media_IDs. This will hold a list of media IDs that should be included in the tweet. I'm going to add a data value, and I'm going to reference our context item that holds the value of our media ID, which we called xMediaID. And then back on the root object, we also need to add another property where the name of the property is called text. And the value is going to be a reference to our text that we generated earlier, which is in the context key of xPostText. We can apply the changes, and then we'll save the action set, and then click Close to return to the list of action sets. Our final action set is going to be to post the JSON that we made to x.com. So again, we'll add another action set. This time I'm going to call this xPostTweet, and this will have 3 actions: the API call, getting the post ID, and the extension callback action. So first we're going to call the API, and I'm going to call this API action name xPostTweet. The request method is going to be a post. Then we'll copy the request URL from the x.com documentation that describes how to post a tweet. We don't have any additional request URL segments or request headers. This time I'm going to have a request content of JSON. And we're going to use the JSON that we just created in the previous action, which we save in the context with a key of xPostJSON. For authentication, again, we're going to use OAuth 2.0. We'll select Pixie as the type to use, and we'll leave the grant type as authorization_code. The token URL is going to be the same value that we specified before, and the client ID will be, again, an environment variable called xClientID, which we'll specify when we're ready to execute. We'll use the same scopes that we specified previously, and audience can remain blank. The access token is going to be xAccess token, and the refresh token is going to be xRefresh token. On the Response tab, we can say whether the request was successful or not in a new context key called xPostResponseSuccess. If there was an error, we might want to capture that in a new key called xPostResponseReasonPhrase. Then we want to change target of the output from ignore to a context key called xPostResponse. Let's apply the changes, and then we'll save the action set. The next action we need to do is going to be a data transformation where we extract the post ID from the response that we got back. We'll call this action extract post ID. The source is going to be the context item of xPostResponse. The operation is going to be a JSON path, and according to x.com's documentation, it should be the same path we used when we got the media ID. We'll put the ID in a new context key called xPostID, which matches what we told our output parameter to return. And then we can apply and save our action set. The final action is to add the extension callback, and I'll just call it extension callback. There's nothing to configure here. This is just a marker that lets the extension know when to capture the values in the context, which will be used for the output parameters. If you try to publish the extension without this action present, you would get an error telling you to either add the action or remove the output parameters. Now that we have all of our action sets defined, the last thing we need to do is to go back into our entry rule set and make sure that we include the new action sets that we just created to our list of actions. On the Actions tab, include the action set that creates the JSON, and then the one that posts the tweet. Now we can apply our changes to our rule and save our rule set. We're almost done creating our extension. There's just one more thing that we need to do. Remember for our API calls, how we referenced environment variables on the Authentication tab? Well, that will work when manually testing the extension on its own environment. But when another project uses an extension, it's ran in isolation and doesn't have access to any of the user's environment variables. We need a way to prompt the user to select their environment variables so we can map them to the ones that we referenced in the extension. To do that, we can go up to the project dashboard and then click on Edit Extension. Then, go over to the Parameters tab and scroll all the way down to the Manage Parameters section. In here, we'll create 3 manage parameters, one for X.com's client ID, one for their access token, and one for their refresh token. This will prompt the user to enter their environment variables when they use the extension, and then those variables will be mapped to the ones we used earlier. Once the parameters are filled, save the project. At this point, you should deploy an environment to Azure so that you can test your extension. There is a separate video that describes the deployment process that I'll link to in this video's description, but the process is essentially to go to the Environments menu item, click on the Manage Environments button, which will take you to the project editor, add a new environment, and specify a name for it. Save the project, then click on the wrench icon next to the environment name, and follow the instructions that appear in the dialog. Once you've thoroughly tested your extension, you're ready to publish. Click on the Publish menu item, and then add your release notes. Then, click the button that says Publish New Version. Then click Continue to confirm. Your extension is now published and ready for anyone to use. In the next video, I'll show you how you can use the extension we just created in your own project. I hope you enjoyed this video and have learned just how versatile and powerful AI rule engine can be. Thanks for watching.